when you see that spirituality, religion, that there are at least these two different forms of religion. One is believing in myths, believing in a certain story, believing in a certain narrative. Moses left Egypt, really did part the Red Sea. That's a literal truth. Frogs were rained down, on the Egyptians for punishment while they were trying to stop the Israelis. All of those mythic, literal, concrete mythic beliefs are one type of religion. Another type is literally a psychotechnology of changing consciousness. And that generally goes under the rubric of things like yoga or meditation, where you actually sit and you focus the mind and you concentrate the mind in certain ways, and that gives you access to a second mode of knowing. First mode of knowing, relative truth. Second mode of knowing, absolute truth. Now, in today's world of nothing but relative truth, to even say absolute truth is, a lot of people will just go, okay, well, he's nuts. We all know there's no absolute truth. He's clearly fanatic or cultic or fundamentalist or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, if you take any number of PhDs in any number of fields and you have them practice Zen until they have a Satori, 99% of them will say that the Satori is real. And in fact, they're more real than relative truth. And so they will recognize the two truths. I have never seen a highly educated person have a Satori and say, it's just subjective silliness. It is an overpoweringly convincing realization of truth. And that is what is so desperately needed in today's world. And of course, this truth can be applied to any number of religious traditions. You can practice contemplation, whether you're Catholic or Sufi or a Buddhist, but you don't have to be any of those religions either. You can just take up meditation. So the whole gist of that, a little bit long digression, is that I was always riding from the viewpoint that there is a second mode of knowing, and there are at least two truths. And we want to get really serious, scholastic, academic, serious about the second mode of knowing. Because although 95% of the world's greatest thinkers, and this is according to author Lovejoy in his extraordinary book, The Great Chain of Being, that this is a worldview, he said, that the greater number of subtler minds, east and west, have maintained throughout history. That there really is a matter, body, mind, soul, spirit. There really is this dimensionality to reality. And these dimensions of mind, body, mind, of matter, body, mind, soul, spirit, can be found within you by just a certain practice of the second mode of knowing, of this ultimate mode of knowing. And the first mode of knowing is symbolic, analytic, representational, works with stories, ideas, narratives. The second type of knowing, and in the first type of knowing, there's a subject-object split. second type of knowing, subject and object are one. It's a non-dual unification type of knowledge, where what you want to know, you actually are one with. And it's that oneness that opens up the ultimate truth of that particular knowing situation. And so this is an extraordinarily important type of knowing. And we don't have that in universities. It has been tossed out, it's been denigrated, it's been debunked, and that at the very least is the farthest thing away from integral education you can imagine. Integral education would be to take all of the major faculties of men and women and educate them, bring out that potential, let them be real and show their place in the world. Not take a human being with all these dimensions and put them through a process that squishes them down into a flattened out nothingness, in a sense, with only one mode of knowing, and that's kind of a scientific materialist mode of understanding the world. It's probably the worst thing that you could call education. And yet it has slowly, over the centuries, crept into what Western education is all about. So my sense is that it's very important for academic and university settings to open themselves to this type of knowing and this type of study and this type of education. Education as a unfolding of your deepest potentials. And there is nothing deeper than this spiritual ground of being. And so that's always been sort of what I've had my eye on, is trying to give justification for this second mode of knowing and the second type of truth. And so I'll quote, individuals throughout history that have felt the same thing. Because as Lovejoy said, the vast majority of subtler minds, East and West, have believed this. And that's one of the things that's really kind of shocking. When I first learned about what was at the time called the perennial philosophy, which simply meant that this notion of two truths and a relative truth and a relative world of form and an absolute truth, unmanifest formlessness, and that one was fine for sort of everyday conventional living, and one was a way of waking up, literally waking up to your true self, an absolute, infinite, eternal, true self. And when I first found out about that, the existence around the world, universally, of some version of that belief structure, except what we got in Western education, on the one hand, you would think, it'd be kind of a joy, because it's like, oh, wow, I finally found out something that's incredibly important. And my reaction instead was rage. I was enraged that I had to go all the way through the first 20 years of my life and nobody told me about this. And it's like, what? I mean, wait, what were you people doing? You call this education? And I really was just fuming. I hardly knew what to do with myself. How could an educational system let that go? How could it just miss arguably the single most important kind of truth in existence and call itself education? I mean, you didn't even get this stuff in history classes. So horrifying. And I've always seen part of what I wanted to do was by knowing as much as I could about these individual human disciplines, anthropology, archaeology, psychiatry, law, history, and so on, and using quotes from them and putting together arguments that would make it more understandable and believable that there were at least these two modes of knowing, these two ways of seeing the world. And when I like to think that I had a small impact on some of this. When I first started writing, if you had an experience of cosmic consciousness, of feeling one with the entire universe in moment-to-moment fashion, in radiant union with the ground of all being, and you told that to a psychiatrist, you could be locked up. You literally could be committed, because that was schizophrenic. That was absolutely, insane. And then from that to about 15 years later, I did a book called Transformations of Consciousness. And I wanted 5 co-authors, and all 5 are from Harvard. And all 5 were as mainstream, as modern, as, this is it, as you could get. And they were all pointing out the importance of these modes of knowing, the way that you find them in all cultures. With the event of that book, every psychiatrist in training at Harvard had to learn the 18 stages of Mahamudra meditation and distinguish it from schizophrenia. So it was sort of like a minor victory that, we finally got this into an academic setting to some degree. Thing is, we have an awful long way to go. And one of the main problems, one of the main reasons, is that of these 2 types of religion, one the mythic, dogmatic, narrative form, and one a psychotechnology of changing consciousness, actually waking up through doing internal scientific experiments on your own mind. Western culture knows almost nothing of the contemplative form. And so as soon as you talk religion at all, it's assumed that it's all of this one type. Fundamentalistic, the Bible is the literal, concrete truth of God. You have to believe that. If you believe that, you go to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell. And that's still our general understanding of what spirituality is, which is a disaster. Because that first form is really based on modes of knowing that frankly, and no offense to our brothers in fundamentalist religions, but it's common from age 7 to 11 in today's world. That's when those types of beliefs are spontaneously part of the mind. And so that still just helps reinforce the media's notion that, oh, if I see this sort of fundamentalist kind of belief, or therefore any religion, it's infantile, it's childish, it's Freud's future of an illusion. And that is, I think, just a true disaster for our culture. Because this one other form, this psychotechnology of changing consciousness, is a way to literally wake up, to literally find out your true self, to find one spirit. And that is all of the contemplative traditions maintain, an alleviation of human suffering. When you find out that you are one with everything that's arising, first of all, there's nothing outside of you that can hurt you or threaten you. Fear drops off enormously. There's nothing outside of you that you are thirsty for or can't wait to get. The addictions die down. These paths are known as the paths of liberation. And the great liberation is the realization, the understanding, that at the deepest part of yourself is the self of the universe. Put in some more graphic terms, your true self is Godhead. You and Godhead are fundamentally one. And that, again, is not a belief. It's an actual realization that you have upon practicing the contemplative injunctions and exemplars. And like I say, I have yet to see an educated master's or doctorate person go through that training, have a satori, and then say, oh, that's nothing, it's just subjective psychosomatic hooey. Every single one of them that I know goes, oh, my God, this is reality.